The massive War Council chamber stretched out like a cathedral of metal and crystal, its curved walls displaying star maps of conquered territories. Rows of young Valerian officers sat in perfect formation, their purple-scaled faces gleaming. Under the harsh artificial lights, the air hummed with quiet confidence. These were the best and brightest of their species, trained in the finest military academies across 3 systems. Then General Krixtal entered the room. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as the battle-scarred veteran limped toward the central platform. His 6 compound eyes swept across the assembled officers like searchlights, taking in every detail. Where other Valerians had smooth, pristine scales, Krixtal's hide was a roadmap of violence. Deep purple scars ran from his left temple down to his jaw, a plasma burn that had nearly cost him his life. His right arm moved stiffly, servo-assisted after taking shrapnel from a human explosive device. Most disturbing of all were his eyes. 4 of the 6 had been replaced with mechanical implants that glowed with an eerie blue light. "Attention!" barked the Academy Commandant, and 200 officers snapped to their feet in perfect unison. Krixtal waved them down with his good arm. "Sit. This isn't a parade inspection." His voice carried through the chamber without amplification, rough and gravelly like stones grinding together. "I'm here to save your lives." Nervous glances passed between the younger officers. They had heard whispers about General Krixtal, the hero of the Centauri campaign, the conqueror of the Rigel system, but the being before them looked more like a broken relic than a legendary warrior. "You've all read the intelligence reports." "On humanity," Krixtal continued, his mechanical eyes focusing on individual faces in the crowd. "Slow reaction times, primitive weapons technology, carbon-based biology that makes them vulnerable to environmental extremes, limited telepathic abilities, short lifespans." He paused, his mandibles clicking in what might have been amusement. "I see some of you nodding. Good. That means you've been paying attention to your briefings." Lieutenant Vexmar, fresh from the Naval War College, couldn't contain himself. "Sir, with respect, the data is quite clear. Humans have been classified as a minor threat at best. Their fastest ships are barely half the speed of our interceptors. Their strongest weapons can't penetrate modern Valerian armor. Why are we even discussing them as a potential threat?" Several other young officers murmured agreement. They had studied the holographic battle simulations, analyzed the technical specifications, run countless computer models. By every metric that mattered in galactic warfare, humans were insignificant. Krixtal's scarred face twisted into something that might have been a smile, if smiles could be made of nightmares. "Lieutenant Vexmar, isn't it? Top of your class in tactical analysis?" When the young officer nodded proudly, Krixtal continued. "Tell me, have you ever seen a human in actual combat?" "Well, no, sir, but the training simulations—" "Simulations." Krixtal's voice turned to ice. "Let me share something your simulations don't account for, Lieutenant. 3 years ago, I commanded the 7th Fleet, 12 dreadnoughts, 40 cruisers, over 300 support vessels, 50,000 of the finest warriors in Valerian space." His mechanical eyes whirred as they refocused. "We were tasked with a simple police action: secure a mining installation, arrest some human smugglers. Minimal resistance expected." The chamber fell completely silent. Even the background hum of the life support system seemed to fade away. The humans had exactly 47 personnel at that station. 47. Krixtal's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing everyone to lean forward to hear him. By the time it was over, I had lost 2 entire battle groups and been forced to call in orbital bombardment just to end the engagement. The casualty reports are still classified, but I'll tell you this. We needed 3 hospital ships just to evacuate our wounded. Lieutenant Vexmar shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Sir, surely you're exaggerating. 47 beings, regardless of species, couldn't possibly—" "Their commander was a medic," Krixtal interrupted, his voice gaining strength as the memories flooded back. "Captain Kim Jae-ho, 28 years old. Before the war, he ran a children's hospital on some backwater colony world. Saved lives for a living. Had never fired a weapon in anger until the day we met him." The general's scarred hands gripped the podium, metal fingers leaving small dents in the reinforced surface. His second-in-command was Lieutenant Park So-min, a hydraulics engineer who designed water treatment plants. Their weapons specialist had been a school teacher just 6 months earlier. These weren't elite special forces officers. These were farmers and mechanics and shopkeepers who had been handed rifles and told to hold a position. "But sir," another young officer called out, "human physiology is well documented. They're fragile, short-lived." "Fragile." Krikstal's laugh was like breaking glass. "Let me tell you about fragile. When we breached their final defensive position, we found Kim Jae-ho still operating on wounded prisoners, Valerian prisoners. While plasma fire was burning through the walls around him, he had taken 17 direct hits from stunner weapons, enough to kill most species 3 times over. His left arm was completely shattered, hanging by strips of tissue, and he was still working to save the life of a Valerian soldier who had been trying to kill him just hours before. The room had become a tomb. No one spoke, no one moved. The young officers stared at their legendary general with a mixture of fascination and growing dread. "That's when I learned the first rule about fighting humans," Krikstal said, his voice now carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "They don't know when to quit. They don't understand the concept of hopeless odds, and they absolutely will not abandon each other no matter the cost." His mechanical eyes swept the room one final time. "So before you dismiss humanity as a minor threat, before you trust your computer models and tactical simulations, remember this. Somewhere out there, in human space, there are billions more just like Kim Jae-ho and Park So-min. Farmers and teachers and shopkeepers who love their families and will do absolutely anything to protect them." The silence stretched out like a held breath, broken only by the soft hum of recording devices capturing every word for the archives. "Now," Krikstal said, his voice returning to its normal commanding tone, "let me tell you exactly how 47 humans turned the pride of the Valerian fleet into a cautionary tale." The holographic display in the center of the War Council chamber suddenly flickered to life, showing a 3-dimensional model of Kepler-7 mining station. The massive industrial complex hung in space like a metal spider, its 8 processing arms extending outward from a central hub. Solar collectors glinted along its surface, and cargo bays dotted the structure like windows. Kepler-7 was nothing special, Krikstal began, his mechanical eyes reflecting the blue glow of the hologram. A mid-level mining operation pulling rare minerals from the asteroid belt. Standard defensive grid, civilian-grade shields, maybe 24 security personnel on a good day. He gestured toward the display with his scarred hand. Intelligence said the humans had taken it over as a smuggling base. Simple job. Go in, arrest the criminals, secure the facility. Lieutenant Vexmar studied the hologram intently. "Sir, the station appears completely defenseless. No military-grade weapons, no reinforced bunkers. How could such a facility pose any challenge to a Valerian strike force?" Krikstal's mandibles clicked ominously. "That's exactly what I thought, Lieutenant. My tactical computers ran every possible scenario. Best case, complete surrender within 30 minutes. Worst case, light resistance for maybe 2 hours before we overran their positions." His voice turned bitter. "I was preparing victory reports before we even launched the assault shuttles." The general walked closer to the hologram, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silent chamber. "The first sign something was wrong came when we hailed the station for surrender. Standard protocol. Identify yourself, demand immediate capitulation, threaten overwhelming force if they resist. Every species in the galaxy follows the same pattern. Evaluate the odds, cut their losses, live to fight another day." He paused, his 6 eyes focusing on different points around the room. Yun Tae-il didn't even hesitate. His response came back within seconds, broadcast on all frequencies so everyone could hear it. "This is Commander Yun Tae-il of the Terran. Medical Corps. We are currently treating 63 wounded personnel, including 37 of your own people. We will not abandon our patients. If you want this station, you'll have to come through us." The young officers exchanged glances. Several looked confused by the human's response. "Sir," called out another lieutenant, "why would they announce their defensive positions? That's tactically unsound." "Because they weren't trying to hide," Krikstal replied, his voice growing quieter. "They were making a statement. The medical bay was right here. He pointed to a section of the hologram that glowed red. Central hub, level 7. No strategic value whatsoever. Completely indefensible from a military standpoint. And that's exactly where they made their stand. The hologram zoomed in on the medical section, showing a maze of corridors, operating rooms and recovery wards. It looked more like a hospital than a fortress. My assault began at 600 station time, 3 full battalions advancing from multiple vectors. We cut through their outer defenses like they were made of paper. Security checkpoints fell in minutes. The humans retreated deeper into the station, giving ground at every turn. Krikstal's expression grew darker. I thought we had them. Classic fighting withdrawal, falling back to a final defensive position. Textbook tactics. But as his forces advanced deeper into the station, something changed. The corridors began to smell of disinfectant and medical supplies. The lighting shifted from industrial white to the softer blue of surgical suites. And that's when the real fighting began. The first thing that hit us was the smell, Krikstal continued. Not the usual odors of battle, burned metal, weapons discharge, fear pheromones. This was different. Antiseptic, clean. Like we were attacking a hospital instead of a military installation. Because that's exactly what we were doing. The general manipulated the hologram, highlighting specific areas in red. Dr. Lee Hai-jin had turned Operating Room 3 into a sniper's nest. She'd removed all the medical equipment, except for one surgical table, which she'd reinforced with titanium plating from the station's hull. From there, she could cover 3 different approach routes with perfect precision. His mechanical eyes whirred as they focused on the memory. But here's what made it impossible to assault. She was still operating. Every time my soldiers advanced, they could see her through the transparent aluminum windows, bent over a surgical table, working frantically to save someone's life. Her hands were covered in blood, but she kept working, even when plasma bolts were burning through the walls. Around her, Lieutenant Vexmar looked puzzled. "Sir, why didn't your forces simply bypass the medical facilities? Focus on securing strategic objectives?" Krikstal's laugh was harsh and bitter. Because they had made the medical bay the strategic objective, Nurse Cho Dong-wook had rerouted the station's entire life support system through the surgical suites. The air recycling, water purification, artificial gravity, everything vital to keeping the station operational, ran through rooms where humans were performing surgery on wounded. Valerians? The hologram shifted to show the station's internal systems, revealing a complex web of conduits and control nodes, all leading back to the medical sections. Engineer Han Yesol was brilliant, Krikstal admitted grudgingly. She'd spent the 3 days before our arrival, completely rewiring the station's infrastructure. If we wanted to take control of Kepler-7, we had to go through the medical bay. And if we attacked the medical bay with full force, we'd kill every wounded soldier, human and Valerian alike. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank. And the humans had weaponized their own compassion, turning their medical facility into an unassailable fortress by making it too costly to attack. The siege lasted 18 hours, Krikstal continued, his voice heavy with exhaustion even years later. 18 hours of the most brutal close-quarters fighting I've ever experienced. Every meter we advanced cost us dozens of casualties, Humans had turned medical equipment into weapons. Surgical lasers became precision cutting tools. Anesthetic gas was pumped through the ventilation system to create choke points, and they used medical scanners to track our movements through the station's hull. He paused, his scarred face reflecting the hologram's glow. But the worst part wasn't the fighting. It was listening to them work. Through the comm channels, through the walls, through the chaos of battle, you could hear them. Yun Tai-il calling out medical instructions, Lee Hee-jin requesting more plasma for a transfusion, Cho Dong-wook updating patient status reports. They were fighting a war and running a hospital at the same time. The general's mechanical eyes dimmed slightly. By hour 16, we'd suffered so many casualties that we were actually running low on medical supplies, and that's when something unprecedented happened. The humans started sending us aid packages, bandages, plasma, surgical equipment, launched through the station's cargo tubes with handwritten notes. "For your wounded, no strings attached. Several of the young officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the kind of warfare they'd been trained for. When we finally breached their final defensive position, we found something that still haunts my sleep cycles. Yoon Tae-il was standing in the center of the main surgical suite, both arms hanging useless at his sides, broken in multiple places. But he was still trying to work, using his feet to operate equipment, barking orders to medical staff who were no longer there. And on the table in front of him was a Valyrian soldier, one of my own warriors, who he'd been trying to save for the past 3 hours. Krikstal's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. When my troops surrounded him, the first thing he said wasn't a plea for mercy or a demand for terms. He looked up at me with those strange human eyes and asked, "How are your wounded? Do you need more medical supplies?" Even defeated, even broken, his first concern was for our soldiers. The War Council chamber remained absolutely silent. The only sound the soft hum of the holographic display. The young officers stared at their general with a mixture of awe and growing unease. That's when I realized, Krikstal concluded, we weren't fighting an enemy. We were fighting something entirely different, something that could turn a medical bay into a fortress, compassion into a weapon, and defeat into a moral victory. That day at Kepler 7, 47 humans taught the Valyrian Empire our first lesson about humanity. They don't fight to win. They fight to protect, and there's nothing in the galaxy more dangerous than someone who refuses to abandon those they've sworn to defend. The holographic display shifted to show a new star system, and the assembled officers watched as a rocky, mountainous planet materialized in the center of the chamber. Titan IX hung there like a brown and gray marble, its surface scarred with deep canyon systems and towering mountain ranges. Titan IX was supposed to be our staging ground for the next phase of expansion, Krikstal explained, his mechanical eyes reflecting the planet's image. Perfect location, close to the shipping lanes, rich in mineral resources, and completely uninhabited. We established 3 major supply depots and started moving equipment for a full-scale colonization effort. Lieutenant Vexmar studied the rotating planet. "Sir, it looks like an ideal military base. Defensible terrain, no indigenous population to deal with. What could possibly go wrong?" Krikstal's mandibles clicked in what might have been dark amusement. "That's exactly what I thought. We had 15,000 personnel spread across the planet, automated defense systems, regular patrol schedules. By every measure, Titan IX was the most secure facility in our forward operations zone." He paused, his scarred face growing grim. Then things started disappearing. The hologram zoomed in to show the 3 supply depots scattered across the planet's surface. Each one was a massive complex of warehouses, landing pads, and defensive installations connected by underground tunnels. "It started small," Krikstal continued. "A few cases of rations missing from Depot Alpha. Some medical supplies unaccounted for at Depot Beta. My logistics officers assumed it was clerical errors or minor theft. Standard problems when you're running a large operation." His voice grew darker. Then entire supply convoys started vanishing between the depots. The young officers leaned forward, intrigued despite themselves. Supply line attacks were a common guerrilla tactic, but on a supposedly empty planet it made no sense. The first convoy disappeared on day 43 of the occupation. 24 heavy transports carrying enough supplies to feed a battalion. For a month, they left Depot Alpha right on schedule but never arrived at Depot Beta. No distress signals, no wreckage, no trace of what happened to them. Krikstal manipulated the hologram to show the route between the depots. A simple, straight line across relatively flat terrain. My search teams found the convoy 3 days later, parked neatly in a box canyon about 15 kilometers off the main route. Every vehicle was intact, every piece of cargo accounted for. The drivers were unconscious but unharmed, arranged in neat rows with pillows under their heads and blankets to keep them warm. The general's voice carried a note of bewilderment that even years later still colored his memories. And attached to each driver was a small medical tag, written in perfect Valyrian script, courtesy of the 23rd Engineering Corps. No permanent harm intended. Please report to medical for observation. Several officers exchanged glances. This didn't sound like any military operation they'd studied. The pattern continued for weeks, Krixtal went on. Supply convoys would disappear, only to be found later with their crews unharmed and everything accounted for, except the cargo, of course. Sometimes we'd find our own scouts unconscious, in their guard posts, tucked in like children with the same polite medical tags. His mechanical eyes whirred as they refocused. My intelligence officers were baffled. We were being systematically robbed by someone who seemed more concerned with our soldiers' comfort than with actually hurting anyone. The hologram shifted to show the planet's extensive cave system, a network of tunnels and caverns that ran beneath the mountain ranges, like a vast underground city. It took us 2 months to figure out that the humans were living in the caves. Captain Ojihun and his team had been there since before we arrived, apparently. They'd somehow predicted our colonization efforts and prepared accordingly. Krixtal's voice carried grudging admiration. Ojihun had been a construction engineer before the war. He understood large-scale logistics better than most of my own officers. The general highlighted specific cave systems on the hologram. They'd turned the mountain range into a fortress, storage depots hidden in natural caverns, living quarters carved into the rock, even an underground workshop where they were modifying our own equipment for their purposes. "Sir," interrupted another lieutenant, "how could a small human team operate such an extensive operation? The logistics alone would be overwhelming." "That's where it gets interesting," Krixtal replied. Ojihun's second-in-command was a teacher named Shin Bo-ram. Before the war, she'd taught military history at some civilian university. She'd studied our previous campaigns and identified patterns in our tactics that we didn't even know existed. The hologram now showed tactical overlays, supply routes, patrol schedules, communication patterns, all analyzed and mapped with mathematical precision. Shin Bo-ram had turned guerrilla warfare into a classroom exercise. She'd created charts showing our response times to different types of incidents, graphs predicting our patrol routes, even probability tables for when we'd send out search teams. Krixtal shook his head in amazement. She was teaching the others to read our military like a textbook, but the real genius was their demolitions expert, he continued. Lim Su-jin had been a baker on some colony world. Sounds harmless, right? Turns out baking and explosives have more in common than you'd think. She was creating improvised charges using ingredients from standard military rations, things we had in abundance and never thought to secure. The young officers looked puzzled, so Krixtal elaborated. Chemical reactions, precise measurements, understanding how different compounds interact under heat and pressure. It's all the same science. Lim Su-jin could take a week's worth of rations and turn them into enough explosives to take out a bridge. And she was teaching the skill to anyone who wanted to learn. The hologram shifted to show the aftermath of several sabotage operations. Bridges collapsed in precise patterns, supply depots damaged just enough to halt operations, but not enough to cause casualties, communication arrays disabled with surgical precision. The mechanic, Kang Min-ho, was equally resourceful. He'd been repairing civilian equipment his entire life, but apparently that skill set translates perfectly to military hardware. He was taking our own vehicles and turning them into tools for their operation. Krixtal highlighted several modified Valerian transports on the display. Stealth modifications, extended range capabilities, even medical equipment for treating injuries. He'd made our own technology work better for them than it worked for us. After 4 months of this, we'd lost nearly 60% of our supplies and hadn't managed to capture a single human. Every operation they ran was perfectly executed, no casualties on either side, and always with those polite little medical tags apologizing for the inconvenience. The general's voice carried a note of frustrated admiration. "But here's what really got under my scales," he continued. "Every destroyed convoy came with a care package, medical supplies, hot meals, even entertainment programs for our troops. They were stealing from us and then sending us gifts to make up for it. The attached notes were always the same. For your wounded, with compliments from the 23rd Engineering Corps." Lieutenant Vexmar looked confused. "Sir, that makes no tactical sense. Why would they provide aid to enemy forces?" "Because they weren't trying to destroy us," Krixtal replied. "They were trying to make us leave." Every action was calculated to be maximally disruptive while causing minimal harm. They wanted us gone, but they didn't want to kill us to achieve it. The hologram now showed the final confrontation, a massive military operation involving thousands of Valyrian troops converging on the mountain cave systems. We finally cornered them after a 6-week manhunt, surrounded the entire mountain range, sealed every cave entrance we could find, brought in atmospheric processors to flush them out. With gas. It should have been the end of their operation. Krixtal's expression grew grim. When we breached their main hideout, we found detailed maps of every Valyrian position on the planet, battle plans for a dozen different scenarios, supply manifests, showing exactly what they'd taken and where they'd moved it. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. But we also found something else, the general continued. 37 Valyrian prisoners, soldiers who'd been captured during various operations over the past months. They were all alive, all healthy, all better fed than our own troops. The humans had been treating them like honored guests rather than prisoners of war. His mechanical eyes dimmed slightly. Ji-hoon left a final message for me, a personal note saying they'd accomplished their mission and were withdrawing to avoid further complications. He thanked us for our professional conduct and left detailed medical records for every Valyrian who'd been injured during their operations. Krixtal manipulated the hologram one last time, showing evacuation routes leading away from the planet. The time we secured the caves, all 4 humans had vanished, along with every piece of stolen equipment, every modified vehicle, every trace of their 4-month occupation. They'd planned their withdrawal as carefully as their entire operation. He paused, his voice heavy with memory. The only thing they left behind was a fully stocked medical station and a note saying, "Thank you for visiting Titan 9. We hope your stay was educational." The War Council chamber remained silent for a long moment, the only sound the soft hum of the holographic projectors. "That's when I learned the second rule about fighting humans," Krixtal concluded. "They don't just adapt to your tactics, they turn your own strengths against you." 4 humans with no military training had just taught the Valyrian Empire that superiority in numbers and technology means nothing if your enemy understands you better than you understand yourself. The holographic display flickered and reformed, showing a massive space station orbiting a gas giant. Transport Hub Gamma hung in the void like a steel flower, its 6 docking arms extending outward from a central hub. Cargo ships of various sizes moved between the arms like busy insects, loading and unloading supplies for the outer colonies. Transport Hub Gamma was the prize, Krixtal began, his mechanical eyes reflecting the station's lights. "Control that hub, and you control all shipping to 17 different star systems." It was the keystone of human logistics in this sector. He gestured toward the hologram with his scarred hand. Intelligence indicated light defenses, minimal. A military presence, just another supply depot to be swept aside. The young officers studied the station's layout. It looked peaceful, almost civilian in nature. Loading bays, fuel processing centers, administrative quarters, nothing that suggested serious military capability. Colonel Beck In-ho commanded the station's security force, Krixtal continued. 200 personnel, mostly cargo handlers. Mechanics and traffic controllers pressed into service as soldiers. They had outdated weapons, no military-grade shields, and absolutely no chance against my battle fleet. His voice grew quieter. What they did have was something I'd never encountered before in warfare. Lieutenant Vexmar leaned forward. "What was that, sir?" "Hope," Krixtal replied simply, "and the absolute certainty that someone would come for them." The hologram zoomed in to show the Valyrian fleet surrounding the station, 15 massive warships forming a perfect blockade. Destroyer-class vessels, heavy cruisers, and Krixtal's own flagship, a kilometer-long dreadnought bristling with weapons. My tactical computers calculated the battle would last exactly 37 minutes, the general explained. The humans had no escape route, no reinforcements within 3 days' travel, and no weapons capable of penetrating our ship. Armor. It should have been a textbook example of overwhelming force. But as the hologram played forward, something unexpected happened. Instead of raising their shields to maximum power, the human station began deliberately weakening them. Power readings dropped across all defensive systems. The first sign something was wrong came when they opened all communication channels, Krixtal said, his mandibles clicking nervously. Standard protocol calls for communications blackout during siege conditions, prevents the enemy from intercepting. Tactical data, but Colonel Bayek Inho was broadcasting everything. Troop positions, supply levels, defensive capabilities, across every frequency in the spectrum. The young officers looked confused. Several exchanged worried glances. "Sir," one called out, "that sounds like surrender protocol." Were they trying to negotiate terms? "That's what I thought initially," Krikstal admitted. "But when I listened to the broadcasts, I realized they weren't talking to me. They were talking to everyone else." The hologram shifted to show communication. Signals radiating outward from the station in every direction, reaching across multiple star systems. Communications officer Nam Yu-jin had turned the station into a broadcasting center. She was sending detailed tactical reports to every human settlement within 50 light years, not asking for help, teaching every defensive strategy they tried, every weakness they discovered in our attack patterns, every countermeasure that worked or failed. She was turning their last stand into a training exercise for every other human force in the sector. The implications began to sink in among the assembled officers. The humans weren't just fighting for the station, they were fighting to gather intelligence. Staff Sergeant Park Ji-woo had an even more creative approach to the situation, Krikstal continued. He was a former mining engineer who understood industrial equipment better than most people understand their own names. When it became clear they couldn't win a conventional battle, he turned the entire station into a weapon. The hologram highlighted the station's fuel processing center, showing a complex network of storage tanks, refinement equipment, and distribution systems. Park Ji-woo spent the first day of the siege rewiring every fuel cell on the station. Not to create one massive explosion, that would have been suicide. Instead, he created a network of controlled detonations that could be triggered in sequence. Krikstal's voice carried grudging admiration. He'd turned their supply depot into the largest improvised weapons system I'd ever seen. The display showed the sequence of explosions that followed, perfectly timed blasts that created defensive barriers, eliminated attack vectors, and forced the Valerian fleet to constantly adjust their positions. Every time we moved in for the kill, another section of the station would detonate, creating debris fields that blocked our approach routes. Park Ji-woo was playing three-dimensional chess with high explosives, and he was winning. The general paused, remembering. But the truly remarkable part came on day 2 of the siege. The hologram suddenly filled with dozens of new contacts, civilian ships approaching from every direction, cargo haulers, passenger transports, mining vessels, even small personal craft. None of them were military, but they were all heading straight for the battle zone. "Captain Song Hai-in was the first to break through our blockade," Krikstal said, his voice filled with something approaching awe. She was flying a cargo transport, the kind of ship designed to haul containers between star systems, not fight battles. No weapons, minimal shields, held together with spare parts and determination. The young officers watched in fascination as the hologram showed the small transport weaving between massive Valerian warships, dodging plasma fire and missile strikes. She made 7 runs through our blockade. 7. Each one more dangerous than the last as we adjusted our defensive patterns. Her ship was falling apart by the 3rd run. Hull breaches, engine failures, life support systems failing. But she kept coming back. Krikstal's mechanical eyes dimmed slightly. On her final run, her ship was so damaged it could barely maintain orbit, but she still managed to deliver critical medical supplies to the station's docking bay. More civilian ships began breaking through the blockade, each one carrying supplies, equipment, or personnel to aid the besieged station. The hologram showed an increasingly chaotic battle as Valerian forces tried to engage military targets while avoiding civilian casualties. This wasn't military strategy, Krikstal explained. This was something else entirely. Every human civilian in the sector had heard Nam Yu-jin's broadcasts and decided to act. Merchant captains who'd never fired a shot in anger were flying through active combat zones to deliver ammunition. Passenger liner crews were volunteering to evacuate wounded personnel. Even luxury yacht owners were running supply missions. The siege dragged on for 4 days, with the civilian relief effort growing stronger, even as the military situation became more desperate. The hologram showed the gradual evacuation of personnel from the station, not through military transports, but through the network of civilian volunteers. By day 4, we'd destroyed most of the station's defenses and were preparing for final assault, Crickstall continued. But when we breached the command center, we found something that still haunts my dreams. Colonel Bayek-in-Ho was there, along with maybe 30 of his original 200 defenders. They'd had multiple opportunities to evacuate with the civilians, but they'd stayed behind to keep broadcasting tactical data until the very last moment. The general's voice grew quiet. Bayek-in-Ho looked up at me when my troops secured the command center, and the first thing he said was, "Did you learn anything useful?" Not a surrender, not a plea for mercy. He wanted to know if the battle had provided valuable intelligence for other human forces. The hologram faded, leaving the chamber in relative darkness. We'd won the battle, Crickstall admitted. Transport Hub Gamma was ours. The human defenders were captured or evacuated, and we controlled the shipping lanes. But something had changed. The intelligence reports started coming in within hours. Every human military unit in the sector had studied our attack patterns. They'd learned from Bayek-in-Ho's sacrifice. He paused, his scarred face reflecting the chamber's dim lighting. Within a month, we were facing human defenders who seemed to anticipate our every move. They'd turn our own tactics against us, exploit weaknesses we didn't know we had, and coordinate defensive strategies that should have been impossible for such a scattered species. His mechanical eyes whirred as they refocused. That's when I realized what had really happened at Transport Hub Gamma. We hadn't just fought 200 human soldiers. We'd fought an entire civilization that refused to let their people die alone. The War Council chamber remained silent, the young officers processing the implications of what they'd heard. That battle taught me the third rule about fighting humans. Crickstall concluded. They don't just fight for victory. They fight to ensure that their deaths have meaning, and a species that can turn defeat into education, sacrifice into strategy, and last stands into teaching moments. That's not an enemy you can simply outgun. That's an enemy that becomes stronger every time you think you've beaten them. The War Council chamber felt smaller now, as if the weight of Crickstall's words had compressed the very air around them. The holographic displays had dimmed to almost nothing, leaving only the soft glow of emergency lighting to illuminate the faces of 200 young officers who suddenly looked much older than their years. Crickstall stood at the center of the chamber, his massive frame casting long shadows across the curved walls. His 6 mechanical eyes swept across the assembled troops one final time, taking in their expressions of confusion, fear, and dawning understanding. These were the cream of Valyrian military academy, bred for warfare, trained from childhood, to conquer and dominate. But nothing in their education had prepared them for what they'd just heard. "I can see the questions in your eyes," Crickstall said, his voice echoing in the silence. "You're wondering how this is possible. How can a species that seems so weak, so primitive, so divided among themselves pose any real threat to the might of the Valyrian Empire?" He walked slowly between the rows of seats, his heavy footsteps marking time like a funeral drum. Lieutenant Vexmar finally found his voice. "Sir, with respect, these are isolated incidents, exceptional cases that don't represent the broader human military capability. Surely our intelligence reports—" "Intelligence reports," Crickstall interrupted, his mandibles clicking with bitter amusement. "Let me share some intelligence with you, Lieutenant. Do you know what Yoon Tai-il was doing the week before I met him at Kepler 7? He didn't wait for an answer. He was performing heart surgery on a 5-year-old human child. Saving lives was his profession, his calling, his entire reason for existing. When the war came to his sector, he volunteered for military service not because he wanted to fight, but because he knew wounded soldiers would need medical care." The general stopped walking and turned to face the assembled officers directly. Oh Ji-hoon spent his career building schools and hospitals on frontier worlds. He'd never held a weapon until 6 months before our encounter on Titan IX. His expertise was in creating safe spaces for children to learn and grow. But when his people needed him, he turned those same construction skills into the most effective guerrilla campaign I've ever witnessed. Several officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The implications were beginning to sink in. Park So-min designed water treatment facilities, Crixtal continued, his voice gaining intensity. Clean water for farming communities, irrigation, systems for desert colonies, life support modifications for deep space habitats. She made life possible in impossible places. When the war reached her sector, she simply applied the same engineering principles to keeping her people alive under combat conditions. The chamber's main display suddenly activated, showing detailed star charts of human space. Thousands of star systems sprawled across the holographic projection, each one representing entire worlds full of civilians who had never seen combat. Beck Inho managed shipping routes for a civilian cargo company, Crixtal said, gesturing toward the display. His job was making sure medical supplies reached remote colonies, that food shipments arrived on schedule, that families separated by interstellar distances could stay connected. Logistics was his life's work. When we threatened Transport Hub, Gamma, he simply treated the battle like the ultimate logistics problem. The general manipulated the display, highlighting specific systems that glowed with different colors. These represent the humans we've actually fought so far. The red systems indicate direct military engagement. Count them. The young officers began counting, their voices creating a low murmur that gradually faded into shocked silence. Out of thousands of star systems, fewer than 50 glowed red. 53 engagements, Crixtal confirmed. In 3 years of warfare, we've encountered active resistance from 53 human settlements. We've been fighting less than 1% of their total population. His mechanical eyes whirred as they focused on individual faces. And every single victory has cost us more than we expected, taught them more than we intended, and left them stronger than they were before. Lieutenant Vexmar's voice was barely above a whisper. Sir, if these were just their civilians, their non-combatants, then where is their actual military, their real army? Crixtal finished the question with a grim smile. Excellent question, Lieutenant. I've been asking myself the same thing for the past 2 years. The holographic display shifted, showing ship movements throughout human space. Massive formations of vessels moving in coordinated patterns, exercises being conducted on a scale that dwarfed even Valerian military operations. Human military. Doctrine is different from ours, Crixtal explained. We concentrate our forces, strike hard and fast, overwhelm through superior firepower. Humans do something else entirely. They prepare. The display zoomed in on a seemingly quiet star system. This is the Centauri defense perimeter. Intelligence estimates suggest they have more military hardware in this one system than we've encountered in all our previous engagements combined. The assembled officers stared at the display in growing horror. The system was alive with activity. Massive orbital platforms, fleets of warships, defensive installations that seemed to stretch across entire asteroid belts. But here's what really keeps me awake during rest cycles, Crixtal continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. These installations aren't new. They've been building this network for decades, long before we ever encountered them. While we were congratulating ourselves on our superior technology, humans were quietly preparing for a war they knew would come eventually. The display shifted again, showing communication patterns between human systems. Lines of data flowed between stars like a vast neural network, connecting every settlement, every colony, every outpost in real time. Every battle we've fought, every engagement we've won, every tactical victory we've achieved, all of it has been recorded, analyzed and shared throughout their entire civilization. The pediatric surgeon, the construction engineer, the water treatment designer, the shipping manager. They've all been teaching their people how to fight us. Crixtal's scarred face reflected the hologram's glow. We've been providing them with a comprehensive education in Valerian military tactics, and they've been excellent students. One of the younger officers raised a tentative hand. Sir, surely our technological advantages are disappearing rapidly, Crixtal cut him off. Human adaptive capacity is unlike anything we've encountered. They don't just learn from their mistakes, they learn from ours. Every weapon we use, every ship design we deploy, every tactical formation we employ gets studied, analyzed, and countered within months. The general walked back to the center of the chamber, his movements slow and deliberate. I've read the latest intelligence reports from our research divisions. Human settlements are now producing weapons that match or exceed our own technology. They've reverse-engineered our shield systems, improved our engine designs, and developed countermeasures for weapons they've never even seen in combat. The holographic display now showed comparison charts, Valerian technology on one side, human adaptations on the other. In every category, the gap was closing with alarming speed. But technology isn't what makes humans dangerous, Krixtal said, his voice heavy with the weight of hard-earned wisdom. It's their refusal to give up. It's their ability to turn any profession, any skill, any life experience into a weapon against those who threaten their people. It's their absolute certainty that no sacrifice is too great if it protects their families. He turned to face the assembled officers one final time. We started this war believing we were fighting a primitive species that would surrender once they understood the futility of resistance. Instead, we've created an enemy that grows stronger with every defeat, smarter with every battle, and more determined with every loss. The chamber fell into complete silence. Even the hum of the air recyclers seemed muted, as if the station itself was holding its breath. My recommendation to the High Command is simple, Krixtal concluded. Immediate ceasefire negotiations. Not because we cannot win this war, but because winning it will cost us everything we are. Every human settlement we destroy creates 1,000 more who will never forget. Every civilian we kill becomes a martyr who inspires 1,000,000 others to take up arms. His mechanical eyes dimmed as he gathered his files from the podium. If we continue this war, if we push humanity past the point of no return, we won't be fighting doctors and teachers and engineers anymore. We'll be fighting an entire species that has decided death is preferable to submission, and that, young officers, is a war that no one wins. Krixtal moved toward the chamber's exit, his footsteps echoing in the absolute silence. At the doorway, he paused and looked back one final time. Prepare your fleets if you must. Train your soldiers, sharpen your weapons, perfect your tactics. But remember this, somewhere in human space, a pediatric surgeon is learning to field strip a plasma rifle. A teacher is studying orbital mechanics to plan boarding actions. A baker is calculating the precise chemical reactions needed to breach our hull armor. And they're doing it all with the absolute certainty that their cause is just. The door closed, behind him with a soft hiss, leaving 200 of the galaxy's finest military officers alone, with their thoughts and the slowly fading holographic display. In the silence that followed, each young warrior contemplated the same terrifying truth. They had trained their entire lives to fight enemies, but humanity was something else entirely. They were fighting an idea, and ideas, once planted in the fertile soil of righteous anger, were the most dangerous weapons in the universe. The end.